It's Wednesday, and you all know what that means. It's time for another episode of the Life in the Movies podcast. I'm one of your co hosts. My name is Ryan Camp. Thank you all so much for tuning in. This week, Jacob and I are going to be having some fun, poking fun at some of the biggest box office bombs of all time. This was Jacob's idea, and I'm looking forward to talking about it. We'll also be talking about Jessica Jones Season 1, Episode 11. And yeah, it's going to be a ton of fun. But first, I got to introduce my good friend and my co-host Jacob Martin. Jacob, how are you?
I'm doing great, my friend. It's always a pleasure talking about movies and being a part of this awesome podcast with you.
Yeah, I agree. Well, how's life for you? How's things going?
Life's been doing pretty good. I've had a kind of a busy weekend, done some fellowship with other friends and families, and just enjoyed life. Kind of being at a little bit of a slower pace while still having some productive time as well. It's been pretty good, and I've enjoyed watching some movies on the side as well. And I guess we'll share that in a few minutes. I actually just, at the time of recording, just finished watching the Jessica Jones episode. I almost forgot to watch it this week, but here we are. I actually did get to finish it, and I'm excited to talking about it as well. How's life going for you, Ryan? How's your new job?
It's going fantastic. I can firmly say that my professional life is very much in the debit section. You want everything to be in the debit section and not the credit section. I didn't realize just because I appreciated my old job. I made a lot of good friends there, and I'm just glad to be in a bit more of a stable environment. And I'm just going to leave it at that because I've actually been texting a former coworker of mine, and he's been telling me it's gotten so much worse since you left. So I believe that there is a God, and I do believe that his timing is perfect. I do not know it, but I just have to trust that it is the right timing, for lack of a better word.
Amen to that.
All right, well, before we dive in, I almost forgot I wanted to talk about this. The Toronto International Film Festival is in the books, and Jacob, and the big winner was Steven Spielberg's new film, The Fablemans,
Right.
and I believe it was the Midnight Madness winner. People's Choice Midnight Madness Award winner was Weird the Al Yankovic story, the Weird Al Yankovic biopic starring Daniel Radcliffe. This is not going to be a super nuanced TIFF discussion, but I mean, TIFF is a pretty big deal, and it's usually a pretty good indicator of what's going to be nominated for Oscars, and it's looking like Spielberg still has the magic.
Yeah, I'm very much excited to check those movies out, especially the Steven Spielberg one. He's one of the best directors there is. I know some people say he's lost his touch, but I know between The Fablemans and West Side Story that came out last year, I don't think he's lost his touch. He's still just as good as he was in his youth.
Yeah, absolutely. And just for context's sake, I want to read off just a couple of the past TIFF People's Choice Award winners. In 2016, it was La La Land. That won a lot of awards. 2017, it was Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. 2018 was Green Book, which won Best Picture, controversially, but it still won Best Picture. 2019 was Jojo Rabbit. 2020 was Nomadland, and 2021 was Belfast. So TIFF is usually a pretty big indicator as to what the Academy is going to be looking at, and it's going to be looking like it's going to be a good time in the Spielberg household.
Yeah, that's for sure.
All right. Well, like I said, not a super big nuanced TIFF discussion, but I did want to bring it up. Let's dive into some stuff we've been watching lately. So, Jacob, what have you been watching lately?
Well, I actually caught up on some Stanley Kubrick movies this past week. One of the movies I checked out was Spartacus. It was actually a rewatch as I had seen it several years ago. Spartacus is interesting as it's a movie that Kubrick has distanced himself from because it was the only film he didn't have true full creative control. However, when you actually watch the movie, even though I guess people say this is his most commercial film because he made it inside the studio system. You got to give credit where credit is due. Kubrick still made an awesome movie, even though it's not maybe his most artistic effort. I'm a sucker for these historical epics with a lot of like epic scope in the cinematography and the epic ensemble cast along with it. So Spartacus was right up my alley, and I dare say it's one of his best films. I don't know if I'll get flack for that for some Kubrick fans, but yeah, I actually do really enjoy Spartacus. Be warned, it's an extended runtime, 3 hours and 17 minutes. But if you can get through movies like Ben Hur and the Ten Commandments, I don't think the runtime is going to be a problem. The movie stars Kirk Douglas, of course, as Spartacus, who's a slave who becomes a gladiator, who is compelled to rebel against the Roman Empire and lead an army against fellow slaves in a fight for freedom. It's a very compelling story and a pretty awesome ensemble cast along the way. Peter Ustinov is in the film, who actually won an Oscar for supporting actor, which was actually pretty impressive. You also got Laurence Olivier, Tony Curtis, Gene Simmons, the very underrated Charles Lawton, one of the best character actors of that time, even in this movie as well. I think this is an epic movie. I don't get why Kubrick distanced himself from this movie, even though it's not maybe as artistic as 2001 or The Shining. I still think it's really, really good, and I had a blast with this one.
I remember watching this for the AFI project, and it still boggles my mind that Kubrick would go on to direct 2001 and Eyes Wide Shut and A Clockwork Orange and just these incredibly artsy and just very dynamic movies. And to think that also in his catalog is Spartacus, that wouldn't look out of place beside movies of William Wyler or Cecil B. DeMille's catalog. Uh, of course, the I am Spartacus moment is iconic, but I mean, Kirk Douglas, let's just talk about him for a second. That dude was a machine. Like in that movie, he is just, he's not ripped. He doesn't have like a six pack, but he is like built like a house. Like you just, like he is, looks like he is just he's like, he looks like he is carved out of granite, fair to say.
Yeah, he really goes all out in the performance. And what a little bit saddening is I think part of the reason Kubrick distanced himself from the film was supposedly he and Kirk Douglas couldn't get along while making the film. Kirk Douglas was also a producer on the film, and I think it's rumored that Kubrick may have ghost direct not Kubrick, but Kirk Douglas may have ghost directed some aspects of Spartacus, which was why Stanley Kubrick was upset over the final cut of the film. That's a shame because Kubrick and Kirk Douglas did two awesome movies together, Spartacus and Paths of Glory. If you haven't seen it, I think it's an amazing, underrated Stanley Kubrick film. I wish they did more collabs because I like what they did in these two movies, and it's a shame we didn't get any more from them.
Well, if it feels like this year is just a year of like movie drama with things like Don't Worry, Darling and the upcoming Amsterdam, but I just keep in mind that this drama has always existed. It's just with social media, it's just in our face a lot more. But
Yeah.
anyway, Jacob, what else you got?
And I actually watched Kubrick's follow-up movie as well, and that two for double bill videos coming later this week. The other one I watched from Kubrick was Lolita from 1962, and this was one I had never seen before. This movie stars James Mason as a writer who travels to America. He ends up living in a boarding house run by a, a woman played by Shelley Winters, and she has a daughter named Lolita. And James Mason gets a little bit too obsessive over this 14-year-old girl. And for one, I am kind of shocked that Stanley Kubrick made a movie that tackled such subject matter in 1962 when you couldn't make a movie with that subject matter usually. A part of me is confused over how he made the movie, and two, I'm confused what the what this movie is made for and who was this movie made for. To me, the movie's like a double-edged sword. It's a well-made movie, great cinematography, really good performances here, especially considering how unlikable a lot of these characters are, especially James Mason, who's pretty much a pedophile in this movie. I'll say that for good measure. He is very obsessive over a teenage girl the whole movie, and there's a lot of disturbing implications in that. But he still gave a good performance. But my issues with the film is, despite it being well made, it's hard getting into the narrative because of the subject matter. Even though it's not explicit because of the time it was made, you still see the implications of it, and you're like, it's hard getting into the film. And two, the film is like 2.5 hours long, and so the film felt like torture because of the subject matter, how unlikable the characters are. It was just an awkward, unpleasant experience, and it definitely one of my least favorite Stanley Kubrick films. Another one where I get it if you like the filmmaking aspects and the performances, but I struggled to get into the story on this one.
Talk about movies that would never be made today. Lolita would be near or at the top of every list.
Yeah, pretty much. To me, the other weird aspect of this movie is Peter Sellers keeps popping up in the film, and every time he shows up, he's out of place. Like he plays the bumbling goofball that you expect Peter Sellers, like he does in the Pink Panther movies. And I do not understand why he's in this movie. It was like one of the biggest out there moments I think I've seen in any Kubrick movie.
That must have been a favor job. I bet Peter was like, Stanley, I need the job. What do you got for me? And is like, all right, let's just throw him in something. Who knows? I mean, I maybe I don't want to be harsh, but I mean, Sellers would do great work for Kubrick down the road in Doctor Strangelove, which I don't know if you've gotten to yet, but that movie is great if you haven't seen it.
I've seen it before. It's not one of my favorites, but Peter Sellers is really good in it.
Yeah, he breaks his back in that movie. He's three different roles. I mean, the dude was mad talented.
Yeah, that's for sure, and you can't go wrong with him as Clouseau in the original Pink Panther movies.
Yeah, that is very true. We must find that woman.
Yep.
And what else you got?
Another one. Let's see. Recent one I checked out for celebrating Disney. In the spirit of Halloween coming up and the upcoming sequel coming to Disney Plus, I revisited Hocus Pocus. And if you remembered in our September preview, I made the unpopular opinion that I'm not a fan of this movie. But then again, I only saw the movie once. I was a moody teenager, and I didn't get the movie then, and I gave it like half a star out of five on Letterboxd. Was I really harsh on this movie? Well, it's not half a star out of five, but I still don't like the movie. Now I'd go 2 out of 5. I get it if you like the movie. I think part of the reason why people enjoy it, I think, is the Halloween aesthetic. I think it's done very well and it's very inviting. And I will give you this: Bette Midler carries the entire movie on her back as Wilfred Sanderson. She completely owns this role. I thought she was definitely the one that got the most laughs out of me, even from someone who doesn't like the movie. And considering this film is directed by Kenny Ortega, usually a musical director who also did Newsies and the High School Musical films, the musical number he snuck in with Bette Midler singing "I Put a Spell on You," best part of the whole movie. My issue with Hocus Pocus mainly relies on the fact that you have a pretty messed up story in the front and center of it. These three witches, these sisters who feast on children, sucking their souls to make them look young. That's a premise straight out of a horror movie. It's a very disturbing, messed up premise for a Disney movie. And I think if the movie embraced the insanity, I guess the horror elements of the story, I probably would have gotten into it. Definitely on the level of maybe some of Disney's underrated 80s movies like Something Wicked This Way Comes, Return to Oz, darker narratives in Disney films that I do enjoy because of how much Disney was willing to go in some of the darker moments. But my issue is Disney took this dark of a premise and turned it into a cheap joke. I wasn't a fan of a lot of the comedy in this movie. A lot of it fell flat. I didn't even care for Wilfred's two sisters, like Sarah Jessica Parker. Some people say she's attractive and she's funny. I thought she was annoying and was the female equivalent of the worst of Adam Sandler. I'm sorry I had to say it. I'll probably get roasted for saying that, but I don't like Sarah Jessica Parker in this movie. The the kid characters I'm not a fan of either. There's an extended joke where the main character is shamed because he's a virgin because he lit the candle. One, that joke was old fast, and two, it was painfully awkward of a joke for a Disney movie. And I don't know who the movie was made for. I think the film was trying to have a bit of an adult edge. Not that that's a bad thing, but when you have that mixed with a dark premise that would have worked better in a horror movie. Hocus Pocus is just off to me. I do not get the hype for this one, and I don't think I ever will.
As I said in the September preview, I do appreciate this movie because whenever I do watch it, it gets me in the Halloween spirit. This movie is just dripping in Halloween atmosphere. You can't watch a movie like this and be like, this is getting me in the mood for Christmas. Like, no, this is a Halloween movie, simple and plain. That's why I have a soft spot for Goosebumps too. That movie gets me in the mood for Halloween every time I watch it. So there that is. So it gets points for the ambiance. Not gonna lie, I will probably watch Hocus Pocus 2 just for a morbid curiosity, for lack of a better word. But I want to give a shout out to Kenny Ortega because he is secretly a fantastic director. If any of you watching out there have ever enjoyed pretty much anything from Michael Jackson, from Thriller up to his unfortunate passing, you can thank Kenny Ortega for directing that. He directed the Thriller music video. He was Michael's go-to choreographer for his various world tours, Dangerous, His Story, the whole nine. He directed all the High School Musical movies, like you mentioned, Jacob. The dude is secretly a fantastic talent, and I think no one gives him his roses not nearly enough, and I think that needs to change.
Yeah, I definitely agree. To me, it's weird he did Hocus Pocus since he primarily did musicals. But the musical stuff he's done is great, especially the High School Musical and the Michael Jackson stuff.
Well, he choreographed movies like Xanadu, St. Elmo's Fire, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, so I mean, he's had experience with these types of movies before, so it's not too much of a stretch, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, that's that seems fair. Let's see, what's another one I can share. I didn't go see any new releases this weekend. I can tell you about my update on Downton Abbey. This will be the last one I'll share. This is season 2, episode 6. Still another good episode. I really liked. I like seeing more of these characters once again. We're at the tail end of World War One. Actually, at the end of the episode, they announced the end of the war, and I'm excited to see where the characters are going to be post World War One, especially characters like Matthew Crawley, who's now paralyzed. I liked the story that interested me the most was the one where there's a character who shows up who claims to be Patrick, who was the character that was thought to have died on the Titanic. That was actually a compelling drama because it leaves you wondering, what is he actually the real Patrick Crawley or not? Because there's some arguments to be had that that is, but then you see, he's injured real bad and he's wrapped in bandages. You can't see his face. It's easy to rip people off that way. So I could see both sides of the argument in that case. And I was left sitting on the edge of my seat because I genuinely didn't know where that storyline was going to end. And by the end of it, I actually thought it was very brilliant how they wrapped that up. And I still thought it was satisfying regardless of the outcome. This is another really good episode. I've I've the more I've watched Downton Abbey, the more I'm invested in every single character. Again, I think I said this last week. Even the characters I get annoyed with, I still want to see what happens to them next. It's like the best version of a soap opera. Usually, soap operas don't do much for me, and at, at least with Downton Abbey, I guess because it's not as long as your soap operas, it you still get intrigued at what's going to happen next. That's a weird analogy, I know, but I still love this show either way.
Yeah, I just did a brief bit of research. It was never truly answered whether or not that dude was indeed Patrick Crawley. I would have imagined that that wasn't, and that if it was, then it would have been an entirely different show. But considering the fact that we never see the dude again, it's highly likely that he was not Patrick Crawley. But yeah, it's around this point in season two where like I had been hooked beforehand, but this show sinks like it sunk its hooks into me and it did not let go for the remainder of the time. It's You're coming up on the near the end of season two. I believe this is the first special coming up, the Christmas special, which is just full of surprises there. And I won't say anything more, but you're getting into prime Downton Abbey stuff right here. It's like Christmas special is just all quality, and then it's just off to the races from there. And that's all I'll say because it gets real from that point onwards.
I guess the question to ask you, I don't think I've ever asked you since we started talking about Downton Abbey. Who were your favorite characters on the show?
Oh
Coming from
wow.
someone who's coming from someone who's seen it all.
I love Mr. Bates. He's probably my favorite because of the crap that he goes through. No spoilers. Um, I love Lady Mary. She's another one of my favorites. Uh, I love Robert Hugh Bonneville's character. He's another favorite of mine. That's my top three. If I had to round it out, top four, it would be Maggie Smith and Lady Edith. That'd be my top five.
Yeah, those are all great characters. I think just because she gets the best laughs, Maggie Smith is my number one. I think Mr. Bates is a close second. I've just been the most invested in his storyline ever since the first episode. So
Yeah, she just has that general IDAGF attitude, and
yeah,
it's just wonderful to see. And it's Maggie Smith. Who doesn't love Maggie Smith? Come on now.
yep, that's true. So what have you been watching this week?
Well, a lot of movies preparing for Scary Mania because it's literally about 2 weeks out till October, less than a week. I mean, geez, this is flying on by. But I did see a new release, but I'll just get the Scary Mania movies out of the way. Finished up This Night I'll Possess Your Corpse. I was about halfway through in last episode. This movie is nuts. That's all I will say. It has a depiction of hell because first of all, just for context, the movie is in black and white. It has a section of the movie where Coffin Joe goes to hell. It's a dream, but he goes to hell. The hell sequence is shot in color, and it's some of the scariest like hell related imagery that I've ever seen. You have the hellmates down there, they're stuck in like these awkward positions in like this rock or something or other, and the devil's little minions are just walking around with pitchforks, and they're just walking around like, oh hi, and they're stabbing them with the pitchforks, and they're like, and everyone just screaming at the top of their lungs. There's another devil's minion who's walking around with a whip going like whoosh, whoosh, and you're just like, oh, we are in hell, aren't we? And then Coffin Joe sees himself as the king of hell, as Beelzebub above himself, and they have an exchange. Just Jose Mojica Marins was on something else when he was making that, that's for sure. But it's an interesting movie, and I recommend everyone check it out if you have the guts to do it. It's all on YouTube. Just type in "This Night I'll Possess Your Corpse," and it's all there. Then I did a trilogy of Hammer horror movies: The Revenge of Frankenstein, The Brides of Dracula, and The Curse of the Mummy's Tomb. Just for context's sake, Hammer is a studio based out of the UK. From the late 50s to the early 70s, they remade Dracula, Frankenstein, The Mummy, pretty much all the Universal monsters, but in color, and they made them X-rated, meaning that there was a ton of blood, there was a ton of sex, and at the time they were derided, but they have since become cult classics, mostly because of the acting performances of Peter Cushing, who many of you may know as Grand Moff Tarkin from Star Wars, among other things, and Christopher Lee, who was Saruman in Lord of the Rings and Count Dooku in Star Wars. Christopher Lee is just a legend. He had over 200 film credits to his name. The dude, he deserves a movie made about him in his own right. But what's unique about the movies that I watched is that, with the exception of two of the movies I watched, Peter Cushing isn't in Curse of the Mummy's Tomb, and he was in the first Hammer Mummy, but he wasn't in this one. And his presence is very well missed, that's for sure. It's definitely not as good as their predecessors. I highly recommend you all at least hunt down Curse of Frankenstein, uh, Dracula, or Horror of Dracula, and The Mummy. The first three from Hammer, those were all great. And then earlier today, I watched Exorcist II: The Heretic. This has
Oh,
been this has been
I've heard of this one.
this has been widely just completely derided as one of the worst horror movies ever. I wouldn't call it the worst, but it's just incredibly boring on one side, and then on the other side, it's completely out of its mind. And it goes from one end of the spectrum to the other so fast it'll give you whiplash. Like, 1 second you're watching just Richard Burton and Linda Blair just staring at this blinking light looking thing, and then the next you see James Earl Jones in a locust costume. I kid you not, this is a thing that actually happened. And the movie came out in 1977, the same year as Star Wars. So you got to imagine James Earl Jones had to go from the Star Wars set to the Exorcist 2 set. And considering the general attitude on Star Wars at the time, and that everyone was just not really caring all that much, you got to admit James Earl was just not in a good place mentally. Thank God Star Wars turned out how it did. But I will say that Exorcist 2 is not the worst I've ever seen. It's just incredibly boring, mixed in with just WTF moments that just make you feel like you're on a roller coaster. And then before I jumped on here, I finished watching Jaws 2. And this is the sequel to Jaws, and Jaws 3D and Jaws 4 I have not seen. I haven't seen those two. I've heard they're bad. I'm putting them off for as long as possible. Jaws 2 is just fine. It just feels like, because Jaws was such a success, they had to just do something just to create a sequel. Spielberg had no involvement in it, and it really shows. There's a scene literally in the first 10 minutes we see the shark, and the shark blows something up. Like, there's a boat, and it causes an explosion. And for the rest of the movie, you see the shark with like burn marks all over its face. It's kind of a creepy design, but I just feel a great sense of sameness because it's literally the same plot as the first, where the town is like, Chief, if you say shark, we're going to lose money this summer. And just, it feels like, if I were the chief, I would just be pulling a scar. I would be like, I am surrounded by idiots because they're doubting the chief, and yet he's the only one who is truly seen the shark, know what the shark is capable of. You should be listening to him as some kind of sage, but no, and they pay the price for it. Out of the group that I watched, at This Night I'll Possess Your Corpse was definitely the one where it got the strongest reaction out of me. But it's definitely a weird series of movies that I chose to cover this October. The next ones I have to watch are Dawn of the Dead from George A. Romero, Halloween 2, the first true sequel to Halloween, and Friday the 13th Part 2, which I have seen before.
Yeah, I haven't seen a lot of those horror movies you mentioned. I think the only one I've actually seen is Jaws 2. and I agree it was just okay at best, nowhere as good or memorable as the first one. Now, that Night I'll Possess Your Corpse just sounds trippy to me. I'm gonna have to watch
It
that to
is.
see if the hell sequence is as messed up as you claim it is.
I'm gonna
And
need you to watch it just to see your reaction to it.
we'll see. I feel like when you describe some of the ridiculous aspects of Exorcist 2, like James Earl Jones as a locust, I wonder if that's the version of The Exorcist that Beetlejuice Weiss that he has seen 300 times, and it's the funniest movie I've ever seen.
I forgot that was a lie in Beetlejuice. I haven't seen Beetlejuice in forever, but I forgot that was in there. There's a scene where James Earl is in his locust hole thing, and he spits out like this tomato. Is like he spits out tomato just to see that there's like spikes on the ground. And Richard Burton is just like, ugh. Poor Richard Burton. He looked like he would rather have been anywhere else but there.
Oh my.
And then in the new release department, I ended up seeing only one. It was a particularly busy week, but I only ended up seeing one, and it was Pearl. This is the long-awaited prequel to X, and it was really good, surprisingly. I don't think it'll usurp Barbarian as my favorite horror movie of the year, but for a horror prequel, it has no right to be as good as it is, but it is really good. That's all I will say. Mia Goth is fantastic in it.
Yeah, I've heard nothing but incredible things about it. Even those who didn't like X, I've seen opinions say that Pearl was actually a better movie. So even as someone who hadn't seen X yet, I might try to watch this one.
Yeah, you should, because it is quite good. So, and then to wrap things up, I rewatched, and this is a good place for a plug. I rewatched The Road to El Dorado, which
Oh
this
yeah.
coming Thursday, tomorrow, as this podcast drops, I will be going on Jacob's channel to talk about this movie in depth as part of discussing DreamWorks episode 4. I'm looking forward to that. But just general, like summing it up, all that I will say is Kenneth Branagh and Kevin Kline make the movie work. The rest is just kind of there for me. It's like Kevin Kline, Kenneth Branagh, and Elton John putting in the work in the song department. The rest is just kind of there for me.
Yeah, we'll dive deeper into the road to El Dorado when we do the podcast Thursday. I'm excited to talk about this one. I know it's a hidden gem for a lot of people. I'm excited to dive into it and see how the reaction's going to go on this one.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's dive into some Jessica Jones talk. Let's talk about Jessica Jones season 1 episode 11, aka I've Got the Blues. So, severely fresh in your brain, Jacob. Why don't you go first? What do you think?
I was pretty mixed on this episode, honestly. I liked where it was going, with like the fallout after the big shock in the previous episode, and Jessica's determination to take on Kilgrave no matter what. And she takes some severe beatings in this episode. Like she hasn't had any sleep. I think Trish said she hadn't slept in like 48 hours. So Jessica's like sleep deprived, but she's still determined to take on Kilgrave because she is very much she really wants to get rid of Kilgrave once and for all after some of the recent tragedies. And she even gets hit by a truck at one point. And she just gets up like it's nothing. Of course, she does bandage herself up, of course, and her ribs are a little bit broken. But man, this woman is strong considering the stuff that happens to her in this episode. So I like the buildup of this episode. And then it takes a sharp detour with the Samson character and his on and off quest on his like power chemical drugs or whatever he's taking. And I'm not gonna lie, that subplot was so stupid. I don't know why we keep going back to that. I didn't like the sudden change in character in the last episode, and it doubles down on it in this episode. I thought the episode took a huge nosedive because of it. and I was not really invested in that storyline at all, and it took away from what could have been some good stuff. Like we get flashbacks of like Jessica and Trish and how their childhoods were like after Jessica got adopted. I like those flashbacks. We get to see how that reflects in their relationship, even in the present. I like that stuff. I like Jessica's, you know, her determination in this episode, but the Samson stuff is just not good. I did not enjoy it one bit.
Yeah, I said it in the last episode. I'm glad they're getting rid of all the subplots and focusing up on Jones versus Kilgrave. Kilgrave's not even here no, wait, he is. He actually is near the end. But I was just sitting there like, why are we still focusing on Simpson? Like, why is he here? And like I said, it looks like they're gonna build him up for the next season, but it I was so more interested in the whole Jessica and Trish thing because when the show started, I was like, these two have no right to be even closely related to each other. How did this whole thing happen? And I like the idea that they do of just showing that it was all part of this big old publicity stunt and how Trisha's mom is just a horrible human being and just Jessica just casually destroying their sink. Like seriously, that was a moment where I was like, whoa, so this is not a recent phenomenon. Jessica has been powerful this whole time. I wonder what they're gonna do with that.
Yeah, that stuff was all good. Like I was invested in that stuff, and then uh, the whole thing with Trish, and we don't know what's happening to her. There was a scare near the end, but I'm excited to see more of that stuff in future episodes. But I don't know if they do the Simpson stuff in the next season. Oh, compared to Kilgrave, the second season's gonna suck.
Yeah, it's the prospects aren't looking bright, but at least we got Luke Cage back. So
Oh yeah,
it's always nice to see him.
I can't wait to see him in more episodes, and of course his own show, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what did you all think of Jessica Jones season 1 episode 11? Leave your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to read what you have to say. All right, Jacob, let's get into the main event for the evening. And thanks to you, you suggested this topic. I found an article online talking about the top 10 biggest box office bombs. And I don't know about you, Jacob, but movie making is very hard. So I don't think that this is necessarily like a neener kind of thing. This is meant to be fun. But making a movie is very hard. So a part of me feels sad that these movies didn't do so well, but at the same time, considering some of the movies on this list, it's probably for the best, fair to say.
Yeah, I looked at the list before we went record, and some of these movies I can defend to an extent, but at the same time, there's some stinkers on there as well, where you can see why these movies lost a lot of money and flopped really bad, and the bad decisions some of the studios made, and trying to make these movies big as they are when it was a waste of time the whole time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's dive into the list proper, and this is provided by digitalspy.com. Articles called The Top 10 Most Expensive Movie Flops of All Time, with the subheader Blade Runner 2049 has nothing on these guys. So, starting off the list at number 10, The Adventures of Pluto Nash. I've never seen this, I've only seen the Nostalgia Critic review of it. And considering that Nostalgia Critic video, it probably is he was probably being too nice on it. The production budget was 100 million and it lost 96 million. This the producers lost their shirts on this one. That's all I will say. And it's kind of sad because Eddie Murphy is legitimately really funny. If any of you've never seen Eddie Murphy Raw or Eddie Murphy Delirious, seek them out. They are hysterical. But I don't know, this one just everyone was just like, we've got better things to do than to watch Eddie Murphy in space, apparently, with Randy Quaid as a robot.
What? Oh,
Cousin Eddie.
cousin Eddie's a robot. That's what happened after he got abducted by aliens. Hello, boys, I'm back. I'm a robot now.
Hello, Clark. The shitter is full, is full, is full. Oh man. We're gonna need a minute. Oh wow. Okay. So so we
I
never
haven't I haven't seen this movie. I think you can tell.
no, neither have
I
I.
didn't know cousin Eddie was a robot. But I think this came out during the time when I think Eddie Murphy's career was not as strong as it used to be. I think the 80s and 90s was like his peak, and I think after Shrek, his career kind of took like a nosedive after a while. I think what Pluto Nash, I think, was like the beginning of the downfall, I'd like to say, of his career. So I guess it doesn't surprise me that it lost a lot of money. Like I said, I haven't seen the film, so I can't judge it if it's bad or not. But yeah, I don't think 100 million is a good choice if you're spending it on an Eddie Murphy movie. I think his movie should be way lower in budget.
I just looked this up on IMDb. Guess what the Metacritic score is for this movie?
Oh, what's that?
It's 12.
Ooh, what's the rot?
IMDb score is 3.8 out of 10.
What's the
And
Rotten Tomatoes?
I believe it is, the article says it was 5%.
Ooh,
5%.
wow. Yeah, that's really bad.
Well, at least Eddie Murphy wins an Oscar in a few years after this.
uh, actually, I think he was just nominated.
No, I could have sworn that he.
I think he was nominated for Dreamgirls. I think he almost won, but then he did that movie Norbit, which came out around the same time, and he won a Razzie for that. And a lot of people believed Norbit was what cost Eddie Murphy the Oscar.
Oh, you're right. He was just nominated, but I mean, at least he was in Dreamgirls, and that ain't nothing.
Oh, Dreamgirls is phenomenal. If you haven't seen it, Eddie Murphy's the best part in it.
All right, well, number 9 is Stealth. This was a movie directed by Rob Cohen of The Fast and the Furious and Triple X fame, which, I mean, I love Triple X. It's really dumb, but I just love it. It's one of those movies that I just saw a lot of just on HBO and all of that. But production budget 135 million, it lost 96 million. So, wow. And the movie starred Josh Lucas, Jessica Biel, and Jamie Foxx. And I don't think I've seen this one.
Yeah, I haven't seen it either. I've heard of it. I know that it flopped really bad, but that's about it.
Well, on its weekend, it was beaten by Wedding Crashers and Sky High, which I have not seen
Ooh.
Wedding Crashers, but I've heard it's pretty well renowned. And Sky High is criminally underrated. I mean, that movie is so good. Jacob, can we agree?
Yes, definitely.
Well, number 8 is 47 Ronin, starring Keanu Reeves. Production budget 175 million. It lost 98 million. And this is a first time director, and this was a pre John Wick Keanu Reeves, where everyone just thought of him as just the whoa dude. So I have not seen this one, but sounds kind of pretty unfair to me.
Yeah, I remembered seeing this advertised when the movie came out. I've not seen this movie, but I know people were trashing this movie when it came out. And a lot of people thought Keanu's career was dead after 47 Ronin. They thought he was a joke just for starring in that movie. And then what's crazy, I think 47 Ronin was late 2013. Fast forward the year, he did John Wick, and man, did his career bounce back after that. And he's been riding high ever since. So sometimes you have to take a big hit in order to make a big comeback. And I think 47 Ronin was that movie.
Yeah, I mean, and I just want to say, Keanu Reeves, from everything I've read, is generally one of like the nicest humans in Hollywood. I mean, story after story of just his good deeds and dealings. I remember seeing this one tweet recently where someone asked him if Keanu could appear at his wedding, and Keanu was like, "Sure," and Keanu did. I mean, I guess that's what happens when you star in The Matrix. You have enough money to where you can just go off to strangers' wedding and still make money doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I love reading stories like that.
looking forward to John Wick Chapter 4. I'm so excited for it. Number seven, The Lone Ranger, directed by Gore Verbinski. Now, as someone who watched the Gore Verbinski Pirates trilogy, Gore Verbinski is a really good director, and that Pirates trilogy was better than I remember it being. This Lone Ranger movie was terrible, simple and plain. Why Johnny Depp was chosen to be an Indian, I refuse to guess. But man, I mean, and talk about get out of the way the optics of a very white man playing a Native American, but then you got Army Hammer. Do I need to say any more? I mean, the movie, $225 million in production, lost 98 million. So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I remember this movie like it was yesterday. I saw it opening weekend. I respected the production craft of the movie. There's great action in it. I even like the pairing. Controversies aside, Army Hammer and Johnny Depp. I thought they worked great together in the movie. But the story, when I first watched it, was a mess. There was no getting around it. I've actually seen the film a couple more times, and honestly, the more I've rewatched it, the more I really like it. And honestly, the movie, at least for me at least, is massively underrated. I get a lot of enjoyment out of the film, especially I think because I like Gore Verbinski's direction, and I like seeing him do that in a Western movie. I thought the movie's actually good. I think it's one where I think it's better than people give it credit for, and I actually think it's an underrated hidden gem.
That's interesting. I think I'll have to revisit it then because I remember just leaving a rotten taste in my mouth, but anyway, that's neither here nor there. But next up, number six is Titan AE. Production budget 90 million. They lost 100 million. So woof. And I have not seen this in a while, but I do remember seeing this. It's got Matt Damon in it as one of the voices and Bill Pullman. Jacob, you're a big animation guy like I am. Have you seen this one?
I have seen Titan AE before. This was directed by Don Bluth, and
Mhm.
sadly, this is the last film he directed. The film flopped so bad, and it pretty much killed his career, unfortunately. The movie's not that bad. If you look at it as an animated sci-fi film, it's got some beautiful visuals in it. There's some great 2D animation in there. Some early CG in it. Sometimes the CGI is a little dated, but it's still a visually striking effort. Pretty good voice cast in there. You got Matt Damon. You brought up Bill Pullman. They're both in it. Drew Barrymore is also in it, and I think Nathan Lane is also in it as well, if I'm not mistaken. I thought the movie was a load of fun. It's not like the most amazing story by any means. There's a lot of familiar sci-fi tropes in it, but it's still really good. There's some great action in it, and I think the film overall is pretty underrated.
Yeah, like I said, I haven't seen it in a minute, but I do remember liking what I did see. I'll have to revisit that one. Next up at number five is Mars Needs Moms, and
Oh,
yeah, this movie's bad.
it's so bad.
There's no saving it. Production budget 150 million, it lost 100 million. And was this a dark age for Disney? I don't, or is a dark age too strong?
It came out in 2011. It wasn't made by the main Disney Animation division. Disney just distributed it. It was actually made by Robert Zemeckis's production company, which shut down after how bad Mars Needs Moms did, because this was during that phase when Robert Zemeckis did his motion capture craze. You know, he did the Polar Express, Christmas Carol, Beowulf. I know a lot of people are creeped out by those movies, but the Polar Express is a childhood favorite of mine. I actually do like A Christmas Carol. I can't defend Mars Needs Moms, however. That movie was just bad. Like the motion capture is way too uncanny in this movie. The story is just mean spirited and awful. Like the moms get kidnapped from their kids and they get sent to Mars where their brains are fried. I'm like, what? This is this is supposed to be a kids movie? What is this?
It's supposed to be a family picture.
Yeah. What's really sad is the director of the film, Simon Wells. His previous effort was The Prince of Egypt. So talk about a big downgrade there.
Yeah, that's a massive just step down in quality there. Well, next up at number 4 is Monster Trucks. Now, I remember when this came out, I was working in my theater, and I legit, and just a peek behind the curtain in my local theater, if no one shows up for a particular screening of a movie, then we wait till all the trailers end, and then when the movie initially starts, and then we walk up to one of our managers and say, by the way, there's no one in theater 2 or 3 or something like that. And then they're like, okay. And then they go upstairs to the projector and they turn it off. The sound still goes, but none of the picture is showing. I can't remember doing that for a movie more than for Monster Trucks. You couldn't pay people to watch this movie. It was 125 million and it lost 115 million. So, yeah.
Yeah, I never saw this one. Just from watching the trailers, it looked so stupid. Like a monster living in a truck, a literal monster truck.
Do
Get
you get
it?
it? Do you get it?
Uh,
and it just when you see the name Monster Trucks, you think like, oh, like Monster Jam, like Gravedigger or Monster Mud or Maximum Destruction gonna be there, but no, it's a literal monster in a truck, and it's just as dumb as it sounds.
yeah.
Well, next up on the list, and this really breaks my heart that it's on the list, John Carter, because I consider myself to be a John Carter defender. It's $263 million budget. It lost 122 million. And it's a shame because it has one of my favorite teaser trailers of all time, just with the music and and just with the general mood and the acting, and Willem Dafoe saying saying, before you, I had no idea that someone could come to this world and save it. Or I'm butchering the quote, but it's a really good quote. And it got me hyped to see this movie. And I've just always enjoyed this one. It makes me sad that it didn't do all that well.
Yeah, I missed this movie in theaters. I saw the film once on cable, and I'm not gonna lie, I struggled to get into the film. I did not care for the narrative that much, and I thought the main character was so bland. I definitely have to give you credit for defending the movie like I defend the Lone Ranger. I'm intrigued to revisit it at some point down the line to see if I like it more on rewatch. But the one time I watched it, I didn't care for John Carter at all.
Yeah, well, at number 2, and this is a movie we're going to be covering for discussing DreamWorks down the road, Sinbad Legend of the Seven Seas. 60 million budget, lost 125 million, with a movie that has Brad Pitt and Michelle Pfeiffer as the voices, and it did not do well at all. And this was released in the same year as a little movie called Finding Nemo. So, I mean, it was pretty much hopeless from the beginning.
Yeah, and I think what's sad too was after Sinbad flopped, Jeffrey Katzenberg declared 2D animation dead, and we haven't had that many 2D animated films ever since. Of course, we've had exceptions like Disney had The Princess and the Frog, and there was Klaus on Netflix, but 2D animation's not as beloved as it once was, and it saddens me. I haven't seen Sinbad that much. I've seen the film a few times, but every time I watch the film, I'm like, it's better than I remember it. And we'll dive more into that a little bit when we get into discussing DreamWorks whenever we get into it. But every time I go back to this movie, I really, really enjoy it.
Yeah, I've always enjoyed it myself. I have not seen it in a minute, but I am looking forward to revisiting it. And last on the list is King Arthur: Legend of the Sword. And this movie, it kind of makes me happy that it does exist because afterwards Guy Ritchie was like it was like this and Aladdin. After those two, he was like, "You know what? I'm better making like my kind of movies like Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels and stuff like that." And he's since done movies like Wrath of Man and The Gentleman, two of which are movies that I love. I defend this movie ever so slightly. I like that they went in more of this kind of Guy Ritchie-esque direction. When they went mystical, that's where it lost me. I was not a big fan of that. I'm a fan of Charlie Hunnam. I'm a fan of Jude Law, but this just was not it.
Yeah, I get why the movie flopped. I think they overspent on this movie personally. I don't think the movie needed to be what $125 million budget. I still enjoy this movie though. I'm not the biggest Guy Ritchie fan, but I enjoyed his take on King Arthur. Like for some reason, the Guy Ritchie flavor works for King Arthur. I don't know how to explain my enjoyment of this movie. I saw it in theaters. It was me, my sister, and one other person, and me and my sister both loved it. So I've been a fan of King Arthur, and I'm definitely a defender of this movie.
Yeah, I agree. And it's weird. Hollywood comes back to King Arthur and Robin Hood frequently to try and do something with it, but it's just like nobody really cares for it all that much. If when you walk up to a stranger and then be like, "Hey, have you seen a Robin Hood movie?" They're either saying the Errol Flynn one, Robin Hood Men in Tights, or Robin Hood Prince of Thieves from the 90s. And for King Arthur, they think of like Monty Python and the Holy Grail or something like that. I love both of the ideas of this character, but it's like Robin Hood and King Arthur are like box office poison right now.
Yeah, it's weird the obsessions on those two characters, and I think because in the past there have been definitive adaptations of both stories, it's hard making a new one for people to connect to when the other versions were so good.
Yeah, especially the Errol Flynn Robin Hood. If any of you have not seen that movie, do yourself a favor and watch it. It's on HBO Max, and thank me later. And just for one last note before we wrap things up, this list is the most recent one and adjusted for inflation. There would have been one more inclusion on there at the number three spot, and it would have been 1995's Cutthroat Island, which I have never seen. I've heard nothing but terrible things about it, and apparently it's like one of the worst movies ever made, and it killed Carol Co. Studios, which produced T2. Some of you may have heard of it out there.
Now, I have seen Cutthroat Island. It is not a good movie. It saddens me because it's a genre I like. It's a pirate movie. But the biggest crime it commits is it is boring. Like there's not much I remember out of that movie. Gina Davis plays like the main pirate, and I like Gina Davis, but I thought she was miscast in the movie. I did not care for this movie at all. I don't think it's the worst movie in the world. It's just boring and forgettable.
Yeah, I agree. But anyway, that's the list. What box office failures have you all seen and have fond memories of, if you can call it fond? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to read, or we would love to read what you would have to say. Well, that's another episode in the books. Jacob, thank you so much. It is a privilege as always. Tell the people where they can find you.
They can find me on Letterboxd, Twitter, and Facebook, and you can of course subscribe to my two YouTube channels. On my second channel is Storytime with Jacob. That's where I do all the book reviews and read-alongs. I'm currently still reading Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. I'm just getting to the Quidditch World Cup, some very exciting stuff in that read-along. And then on my main channel, that's where I do all the movie reviews, TV reviews, ranking videos, all that fun stuff. We're recording this on a Monday, so the video that just dropped on my channel was my recent Downton Abbey video, where I reviewed episodes 12 and 13, which is season 2, episodes 5 and 6. I recently reviewed Hocus Pocus for my Celebrating Disney series, and I recently did a live stream ranking where I ranked all 22 of Richard Donner's films on my channel. With other videos coming to the channel this week, my next Stanley Kubrick video is dropping. Well, actually, it's going to be dropping the day this video drops, Wednesday, where I'm reviewing Spartacus and Lolita. Thursday, tomorrow, at the time this video drops, like Ryan already mentioned, is our Discussing DreamWorks episode, where me and Ryan will be covering The Road to El Dorado. And another video coming to the channel this week is my Celebrating Disney review of the criminally underrated animated film Mickey, Donald, Goofy, The Three Musketeers. I love that film as a kid, and I still highly enjoy the film to this day, and I'll discuss why I think it's a hidden gem. And then also this weekend, I'll be starting a weekend watch party series on my channel, an experiment I'm going to try to do a live watch party of a certain particular movie. I'm going to test it out with the movie Next of Kin, starring Patrick Swayze. So there's going to be some exciting stuff on my channel this week. If you haven't already, don't feel free to like and subscribe and check out the videos over on my end.
Yes, more than certainly do that. As for this channel, I dropped a review for Pinocchio 2022 style. Thank you, Jacob, for pointing out that that Jiminy Cricket and that whole thing was in the original. Shows that I have not seen the original in about a minute, but thank you so much for pointing that out. And thank you to you all for watching that. And then this weekend I plan on at least reviewing Don't Worry Darling, which should be a very interesting experience considering everything that we know about it now. And I'm going to try and cover Andor. Andor is going to be premiering this week. Actually, it by the time this goes up, it will have premiered. It's going on premiere day. So look forward to my thoughts on that. But anyway, for Jacob Martin, my name is Ryan Cam. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you in the next one. Do take care.